Hey, welcome back to the channel. If you're a lover of all things guitar and all things gear, then this video is for you. I'm super excited about this one. It's been a long time coming where I get to share my main board that I use. So if you've seen any of my other videos, this gear that I'm about to show you is probably 99% of the time what I'm using. But before we get into the pedals themselves, let me just quickly talk about some of the philosophy behind the choices I've made. So when I was putting this together, I really wanted something that was super flexible. Of course, we play set lists, as you know. I mostly play worship music, so that usually involves a set list predetermined that we kind of know what we're gonna play already. But I wanted to have the flexibility of just being able to call up any reverb, any delay, any drive that I had, any modulation just in the fly. There's some times where spontaneous moments are called for, and just being prepared for those just makes me that much more comfortable when I'm playing. So that philosophy kind of drove a lot of the pedals that you'll see on the board. For the signal routing today, I am playing my Gretsch guitar and going into the board, and then out of the board into the UA Ruby and Dream in stereo. So the Dream on the left and the Ruby on the right. And then out of the Ruby and Dream into my Apollo interface, and then into Ableton recording behind me. So the board I'm using is the Tempo Audio 21. I really like it because of its modular system that allows you to add certain things, and then as well as just having those 3 rows allows me to just go this way with the board as opposed to longer this way. Kind of works for me. But on this board I was able to add the patch bay, and so that allows my ins for my guitar and then the outs as well. So no matter if I'm going into some modelers like the Ruby and Dream or going out to some amps in a live setting, you know, I'll have those available in the patch bay. And then I've also put in some USB ports. Some of the pedals like the GFI Synesthesia and the Morningstar MC6 and the Big Sky Timeline, you know, involves you connecting MIDI USB to a computer if you want to use some of the software editors. So just having those USBs on the side allows me to not have to plug and unplug things or trying to reach behind pedals and so forth, and I can just quickly come, put the board down, plug into the USB on the side. On the other side, I have the IEC power cable. Again, just really easy. Instead of having to plug into the power supply, just plug right into the side of the board. Has an on and off switch, allows it really easy to just turn on and off the board whenever you need to. So under the board, there's some pretty foundational things. First off, starting with the Morningstar ML5. That is the switcher I use, and I control with the MIDI baby on top of the board that just controls my drives. So I only have the drives going into that switcher. Afterwards, I have a MIDI box down there, and that allows me to split the signal of MIDI and continue the chain, so I can control everything from the Morningstar MC6, but it also allows me to connect and complete the loop for MIDI. So if you're familiar with some of the Morningstar stuff, you have to kind of complete a loop of MIDI to come back around, so that way, just like I mentioned with the USB ports, I'm able to just plug in on one spot and control everything. So that's the Morningstar, the Big Sky, the Timeline, by just connecting to one spot. And so that MIDI box helps me complete that loop, so I can do that. And last but not least, I have the Strymon Zuma. Amazing power supply. It's been so great, and it powers everything that you'll see on the board. So for the pedal order, I'm going from the guitar into the side of the board. Then the first thing I hit is the tuner, and I'm using the Polytune. Really love that one. And then after the tuner, going into the Jackson Audio Bloom Compressor. From the Bloom Compressor to the Electro Harmonics POG. From the POG to the drive section, which is the ML5 underneath the board, but that is the drive section. Then out of the drives, I have my volume pedal after my drive, so volume pedal. Then volume pedal to modulation, which is being handled by the Synesthesia. Then into delay by the Timeline, and then reverb by the Big Sky. So out of the Big Sky, I go into those out jacks from the side of the board, and then that way I'm going into any modelers I'm using, in this case again the UA Ruby and Dream, or if I am going to amps, then I would come out of the board, same spot, into amps. Let's zoom in into the board and just go one by one now, and I'll kind of talk about why I made the decisions I made and just a little sound of what I may use them for. So I'm going to turn off my delay, and I'm just going to leave a little bit of reverb. So right now, what you're hearing is just the guitar, the reverb, and then the UA Ruby and Dream. So that is my clean sound, and as I said, the first thing I hit is the tuner. Not much to be said there. It works. I will call out that one of the best things that I like about it is that it has a power out. So you can bring power into it, but then continue your power routing out of it into something else. So that's pretty handy if you're short on some ports on your power supply. Then after that, I have the Jackson Audio Bloom, and I am using the green setting, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the faster setting. Sometimes I've used the magenta, which has a more medium attack, but more often than not, I'm sticking to the green setting. So let me just show you real quick what that sounds like without. And now with. So not too huge of a difference to my ear, but that's my point. I want my compression to be more of a feel thing than a sound thing. I know a lot of folks really like the sound of certain compressors, but for me, compression has just always been a real feel thing. And so I just love how it feels, and that's really hard to describe over camera, but if you play guitar, if you play with compression, you kind of understand what I mean. What I really like about it is just how much range it has. You can see from the settings right there, I kind of use a parallel compression, so I keep that compression and that blend about 50%, and so that allows for me to retain a lot of the dynamics from my dry signal, but then include that body that comes from the compression. So at most, I might crank it to maybe 55–60% if I'm feeling like I'm not getting enough out of a certain situation, but usually I'm keeping the compression about 50%. The EQ section is great. I will admittedly say I don't probably use it enough, but when I do use it, it's usually because I'm switching guitars. So personally, I don't like switching too many guitars. If I could go through a whole set list with just one guitar, that's usually my preference. But sometimes with alternate tunings or just different sounds, you know, let's say it's calling for a really stratty sound, that kind of thing, you know, I'm not afraid to switch it either. But that does come with a pretty big sound difference. And so sometimes I may EQ whatever guitar I'm switching to kind of retain some of the similar settings so that my sound isn't changing too drastically. And then I'll just turn on the EQ whenever I switch guitar, turn it off when I'm switching back to another guitar, and go back to my original settings. Now the last thing on it is the Bloom feature, which is a boost. And similar thing, I probably don't use it enough, but the times I do use it, it's usually to just get a little more of whatever stage I'm in drive-wise without going into the next stage. So if I'm on stage 1 of my drive, for example, but I'm not really quite ready to rip it to stage 2, but I just want a little more hair, then I will use the boost as it comes before the drives, and it just pushes the boost that much more, and then of course everything else down the line. So you can see by the settings, I don't even have it cranked up that much. It's really just a little bit to go, almost like a 1.5 stage drive before I hit 2. So out of the Bloom compressor, I'm going into the Pog. Now this spot for me is really an auxiliary spot, and what I mean by that is I don't have an audition loop where I can try things in and out easily, so I kind of just created one, and it comes after my compression, so where my drive stages would be, but then before my modulation. And so for me, drives are usually what I'm swapping in and out, and so that's kind of, this spot kind of made sense for me in my chain. And so right now I have the micro Pog in there, but if something calls for it, I may put another flavor of drive on there. I may put some sort of different modulation on there if I want it to come before the drives or that kind of thing. So it's really just a spot for me to plug things in and out real easy and then just try things out. You can see I have the dry signal all the way through. So with the Pog, what I'm really looking for is for it to be additive, to add and enhance what I'm doing rather than take away. So I don't take away any of the dry signal, and then I have a pretty good amount of the sub octave on there. You can see about 50%. And then maybe 25% on the higher octave. I like it to sound a little synthy, you know, you got the octaves going, but I'm not quite full into synth piano territory, if you know what I mean. So here's an example of a line where I may use that. And now with. Yeah, so I really like what it does to a line like that to just really enhance it with those octaves. So out of the Pog, we come into the drive section. And right off the bat, I'll say I do not usually stack my drives. I like to use them individually for stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. And if I need a stage 4, I do have my board set up to stack, and I'll explain that. But usually I'm just using them individually. I really like just the color and the tones from the pedal in each character that it has. And I found just when stacking them, I'll end up losing some of that or just creating a whole new sound, which is great. I know a lot of people have success with stacking drives, but for me, I just like using them individually, and that's what works for me. So for stage 1, I'm using the Prince of Tone. Stage 2, the Benson preamp, and then for stage 3, using the 1981 DRV. So let me just play some chords and just show you what each of those sounds like. I'll turn off my delay, just keep the light reverb on again. For reference, here's my clean tone again. And then the Prince of Tone. So I'll play that clean. And now with the Prince of Tone. So just add some really nice harmonics, really nice, just a little bit of breakup there without getting too crazy. Usually I'm using that to kind of enhance some maybe some lower parts, like if I'm playing some verses or some ambient things, but the clean is a little too soft, but I'm not really quite trying to stand out, right? I'll kick on the Prince of Tone, just give it that little bit of hair, a little bit of grit, and just makes that part just stand out really nice. Now, after the Prince of Tone, I have the Benson preamp. Love that pedal. I really love what it does with the low end, and just the fact that you have the treble and the bass knobs to play with makes it a little bit different than just, for example, the Prince of Tone where you have one tone knob to sweep. I really like that you can individually tailor the Benson to either add lows but keep your highs where they are, or vice versa, add some highs and keep your lows where they are. Those two knobs make it really, really, really versatile. So here is my clean tone again with that same progression. And now with the Benson. So you can see much more breakup, much more harmonics going on there, and hence why that's my stage 2. So if I'm really playing some really big drivey chords or really big something where I just need to push it, you know, not quite into solo territory, but just really driving the rhythm section, then I'll usually kick on the Benson preamp. So here's an example of that. I'll turn on some more reverb and some delay so you can kind of get the gist of what that may sound like. So using it to drive those big rhythm sections is probably the way I use it the most. But if I certainly need a lead line to stick out a little more, but not quite be into instrumental or solo territory, I'll use that as well. The song Breathe Miracles comes to mind. It's probably not the correct BPM, but something like this where there is a chord struck and then a lead line is hit after. So something like that, where there's just a really big lead line going on, you know, during a big chorus or something like that. So that is my Benson preamp. Now, after the Benson, I have the 1981, and this is probably my favorite drive pedal. I have intentionally tried to replace it since I bought it. Not in a bad way, I just always love to experiment with different things, but no matter what other pedals I've tried, no matter what other pedals I've put on the board to combine with it, it has just stayed on the board since I bought it. So I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, but this is truly my solo tone. I'm trying to think if I usually probably don't use it for any rhythms because it is a hard clipping distortion, so probably sounds a little, might be a little too much in the mix. Again, I like to use the Benson for more of those bigger rhythm sections, but I will use the 1981 for pretty much any solo I can remember since I've had it. It's usually, if I need a high gain solo, that's usually what I'm tapping into. So here's an example of what that would sound like. So once again, with the clean tone for reference. And now with the 1981. So there we go. Really gainy, really love it. It's probably my favorite pedal of drives that I've ever had. So that is the 1981. Out of the drive section, we go into my modulation section, and this is being handled by the GFI Synesthesia. What I really like about it is that you can do two effects at the same time. So if you want a vibrato, for example, that goes into a tremolo, you can certainly do that. Or if you want, you can just use them one at a time, which is what I typically do. But there have been some creative instances where it was really cool to just stack a couple things and get a new sound. I mainly have three sounds that I'll go between, and that is a chorus and a tremolo and a vibrato, with vibrato probably being my favorite. But let's just go through each one and how maybe I'd use them. So keeping that, my first stage drive on, the Prince of Tone, and just that light reverb. Here's some chorus. The Phil Wickham song, I forget what it's called, but there's a line in there that comes to mind. So I may use it like that. It's truly not an effect that I reach for, but if a song part calls for it, or if there's a creative instance that calls for it, I certainly have it there ready to go. After that, I have my tremolo. And so when I think of tremolo, I'm usually thinking of chords more than lead lines to kind of give some movement. But here's what it sounds like. You can hear it really gives that movement. And so when I think of some guitar parts where they're mostly chord based, and sometimes that can get a little stagnant, maybe even a little boring, I really like to think of tremolo just because it gives that movement. And I'm using a harmonic tremolo, and so it's kind of more on the subtle side because it's not fluctuating my volume up and down like a normal trem will do. But I really like it for just that little extra movement when it calls for it. Now, last but not least is my vibrato setting, and because the synesthesia can do two sounds at once, I'm actually using the vibrato setting in it, and then also the phonos section. And so this is a lo-fi vibrato because that phonos is kind of degrading the sound. So here's what that sounds like. And now let me add some reverb and delay. There's forget the name of this song too, but there's a lead line that I used it on recently that I really like the effect. So here's what that sounds like. Just really lovely sound. Really like using it on lead lines for the most part, just to give it that little wiggle. I don't know, I really just like things that move from the tremolo to the vibrato, just things that make things sound a little bit different in a mix. Just for me, just really enhances the sound. So love that one. That is a go-to that I will reach for often when I think of modulation. Out of the modulation, I go into my delay, which is the Strymon Timeline. That pedal's been around forever. It doesn't really need an introduction. Has a bunch of delays. I mostly use the quarter note, and I believe Yes, I use the quarter note on the tape setting, and then I use the dotted eighth on the digital setting, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the digital setting. So those are my main two. I have some other presets, and again, if a song calls for something like a really bouncy dotted eighth or a dual delay galloping type of thing, certainly I make those presets and I have them in there, but these are my main two that I'm reaching for, is a tape quarter and a digital dotted eighth. Now, likewise, out of the delay going into the reverb, I have the Strymon Big Sky. Been around for forever, doesn't need an introduction, but I use three main settings on that, with going kind of like, in my mind I think about it as light, medium, and heavy. And so the light one is the one you've been hearing this whole time, and it is a plate. So here's what that sounds like. So you can hear, not obtrusive at all. It doesn't really sound to me like I'm playing an ambient worship part. So if there's any drier sections that I really need to push, I'll usually stick to a lighter delay, or sorry, lighter reverb. But that's as low as I'll go in terms of worship. I have some other settings. If we get into more funky type of playing or gospel-y, that's not really an ambient texture, I certainly have some springs or some rooms in there that I've tapped into. But in terms of my main three sounds, this plate one is as light as I'll go. Now, secondly, I have the Bloom algorithm. And so this is my medium type of reverb, and this one I will use as kind of my bread and butter. So here's what that sounds like. So you can kind of hear now, kind of starting getting to those a little more washy guitar, a little more ambient, especially once you tack on the delay to that, it gets a lot more in that worship guitar kind of vein. So really that's my starting point when I'm trying to decide on a tone for a certain part or song. I'll kind of start here and then kind of make the decision, is this the right amount? Is it too much? Then I'll drop it down to my earlier preset, or if it's not enough, I'll bring it up to my next preset. So segue, my last preset is the cloud algorithm. And so for that, I'm using actually two variations of it. I have a brighter version of the cloud, and then I have a darker version of the cloud. The brighter one just really allows whatever I'm playing to kind of just hang in the air. So I'll use it if I need to play diamond chords or just something where I'm strumming it and letting it ring out and I kind of just want it to hang. The brighter one is good for that. Same thing with lead lines, if I want those notes to just hang, if it's a part that's very sparse with notes. And then the darker version of it I'll use for if I'm trying to just really stay under and not really stick out as much, because they're the same. But here's the bright version of it. And so if I play the line from earlier, for me, you can hear it kind of just hangs on there with that brighter texture. Yeah, real long decay, sounds really nice. But then, for example, if I switch over to the darker version of it, play the same thing. So you can hear still ambient, still playing ambient guitar, but it just doesn't have quite the hang. Especially in a full mix, that brighter reverb is really going to pop out to me. And that darker one's kind of going to stay more subdued. So again, if I'm looking for something to hang, whether it's chords or leads, then I'm sticking with the brighter version of this. But if I'm looking to stay underneath or just playing big washy chords, then I'm sticking with the darker version of this cloud. Last but not least, I have the controllers that controls all of this. And so the first one is the MIDI Baby 3. And so in my head, I really wanted to separate my drives and my wet effects and modulations, keep those separate. So the MIDI Baby's only job is to control the ML5 switcher underneath, which are my drives. So I got them 1, 2, and 3 for all the different stages of drive. And then if I hold the first one, it turns off everything. So that I go back to my bass clean tone with no drives on at all. And then once again, 1, 2, and 3, depending on what drive section I want to go to. And I said earlier, I don't stack drives, and that holds true, but I did set this up that if I needed to for whatever reason, or if I'm swapping pedals in and out, you know, if I'm in a studio environment and we want to try stacking some things, I do have it set up to do that. So if I hold the middle one, it'll stack, which is normally my stage 2 drive by itself, it'll actually stack my first stage drive with my second one. If I hold the third button, which is my 1981, it will stack my third stage 1981 with the first stage drive, in this case the Prince of Tone. So between those drives, being able to stack them, the boost from the Bloom compressor, I have what I feel is a plethora of drive options should I ever need to use them. The mastermind behind everything, the Morningstar MC6, probably the greatest controller on earth. I love what they do. I love how this works. And for me, it's just been a real lifesaver with all this MIDI stuff. But on the bottom row, I have those 3 reverb algorithms, the light, the plate, the bloom, and then the cloud. So I just click in on them. You can see they'll switch to Big Sky. And then by default, I have the bright one on the cloud. But if I double click, then it switches over to the dark algorithm that I talked about. And then on top, I have my main 2 delays, which is a tape quarter, so that'd be this guy here, and then a digital dotted eighth. Now, I said those are my main 2, and that's still true, but just like with the drives, I've given myself some options. So if I hold my dotted eighth setting there, it actually goes to a straight 8th note. And then if I double click on it, it switches to a ping pong delay. So hopefully if you have headphones or a pair of speakers, you can hear that bouncing left and right. But I don't use those as often, but once again, in the philosophy behind the board of just having options available to me, I have my main 2 right there, and then I have those extra delays on call if I need them. So that's it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this rundown of my rig. I really love it, and as I go into this new year, this will probably be what will be on my board for a while, but I'm always looking to try different things, and hopefully this has been helpful, give you some insight on some of the videos you see on this channel, and just my thought process on how I go about tones and sounds and why I made the selections I made. So if you guys got any questions, I love talking all this gear stuff, let me know in the comments below, and God bless you until the next one.